Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Valentino Stoll.
Hey now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. This week we have a special guest, and that's Landon Gray. Landon, do you want to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Landon Gray. I'm a senior consultant at Test Double. We're a software consultancy. We're fully remote, and we work on Rails applications, React, you name it. So,
Yeah, we've had Justin Searles on the show a few times, so we know a little about Test Double. Good folks over there. Yeah. So, you gave a talk at RailsConf, and then at Blue Ridge Ruby, you gave talk about AI and Ruby. And I think, as I've talked to people about AI and Ruby, they're usually actually just calling out to some other system written in some other language from their Ruby application. Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about actually doing the AI work in Ruby?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, doing the AI work in Ruby.
Wow. Yay!
Yay!
We are not losers. No, I'm just
no
kidding.
PyCall, if anyone knows what that is.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want to give us kind of the 10,000 foot view on this? Like, what can we do? What's possible? How do we approach it?
Yeah, so turns out there's a lot we can do with just native Ruby and machine learning. So kind of a little bit of history, a little bit of background. So a lot of people have been kind of working on calling some of the Python libraries using a Ruby gem, or I don't know if it's a Ruby gem, but the Ruby code called PyCall, which lets you call that Python to use machine learning libraries in your Ruby. But I was like, well, why can't we do this in native Ruby? Like, I was just plagued by that question. You know, why is there no support? And I sort of landed, and just in general, like, why aren't Rubyists doing more of this? Why has Python sort of taken over this whole landscape? And sort of where I landed on was two things. One of them was maybe they just got a little bit of a head start, you know, and a lot of people were using Python, and so that kind of caught on. The other thing was I kept hearing that Ruby was slow, and that kept annoying me because, you know, understanding how languages work, you know, Python's it's not a compiled language. You know, it's like, what's it doing under the hood? And it turns out like a lot of libraries are calling underneath the hood, you know, C libraries or C++ libraries. I don't know, one of the two, or something else. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's cheating to say, you know, Ruby's slow and you're using Python, and that's suspect. And also, I don't really trust you because, you know, you care too much about white space. So I started embarking on a journey to just sort of learn ML in Python. I took a class in the last year, early this year, and I was trying to take those techniques and move them over to the Ruby world. And so that's kind of how I got into like, hey, I'm going to give this talk to get people excited about using Ruby, like the language they want to use in the first place. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. You're hearing a lot of the same things I'm hearing, right? And so,
yeah.
What we're talking about here is machine learning, right? Which is kind of different from AI in that AI is like pretty much just large language models at this point, which in machine learning is like a very specific sect of machine learning, right? Like neural networks.
Yeah. So I think about like AI is the big circle. I think I was listening to another podcast you had with some folks from Databricks talking about machine learning, and I don't know if it was there or someplace else where people were harping on like getting on top of the term AI, that it's like a marketing buzz term. You know, it's kind of just a superset, and then within it, you know, you have machine learning, or you have LLMs, or you have neural networks. But yeah, machine learning is Sorry, I lost my train of thought. But sorry, you were saying again.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, I didn't see your RailsConf talk, but is the work that you're focusing on more of like very specific sets of machine learning, or was it focused on the bigger picture? Like, where are you focused on?
Yeah. So right now, in terms of area of machine learning I was kind of interested in. I was just really trying to present the idea and show people that this concept could actually work. There are several, there are a handful of like Ruby or Rails talks that if you Google around, people will talk about, hey, you can do some, machine learning in Ruby. But I was like, where's the code? Where's the code? And I wanted to build out a project. So I have a full project built out. It's actually in the Docker. You can download the Docker container and everything. And it's the whole project I built to present at Ruby's Conf and Rails Conf to say like, hey, here's the code. I'm giving it to you. You can do it. And I just picked a really simple model. So I did like linear regression, which a lot of us are familiar with from the equation y equals mx plus b, the equation of a line. And I built out a project to kind of predict the weather using some historical weather data I got from some site. But the weather data was like the Atlanta weather. And yeah, so that's kind of how I went about it. And that was kind of the area I focused on. I'm trying to, I don't know if I want to publicize this as I we'll see if I actually finish, but I'm trying to implement a neural network from scratch, and adapt some of the ones I've seen from Python just to better understand how things work under the hood. Because I don't just want a high level understanding. I want to understand how these tools work and like what's a sigmoid function, what's back propagation and all that stuff. Like I want to understand all of it. So we can do more of it in the Ruby space. And I personally think that if we can get more people doing machine learning type work and using Rails, I don't really think there's a faster way. There are options, but it's really fast to like prototype an app in Rails if you can also have the machine learning piece at a low cost and not have to learn all the data science. If someone does that legwork for you and guide you in the right direction, like we could, it could really explode and people could be like, oh, I'm going to start a startup, and slap on a gem and do a lot of really cool stuff right out the gate.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the trajectory of things with large language models kind of taking over as like the general purpose. This is how you'll be doing machine learning, which I don't think we're quite there yet because of just how expensive it is to compute a lot of this stuff, right? Like anytime you want to like take one of these large language models locally or on device or something like this, right? It's just like, it's slow because you don't have the resources, right? And or it's expensive, right? Like those are the two options. So like you either spend a ton of money and then like have to host everything yourself and like have to do all this compute yourself, or you're like spending the money to like have somebody else do that, right? And so it's like kind of interesting because like from what I've done machine learning, it's like you pick a very specific model that targets the problem that you want to solve. Like linear regression happened to be a perfect one for the weather modeling, right? And you don't have
not
to,
really.
or maybe not perfect, but like
it was a simple model. I could show people there's a lot of better models you could pick.
But as an example, right? Like you could pick another model that can produce better results now, and now that you've had it in Ruby, you can calculate things a little bit differently. But what I'm getting at is like the AI like conglomerate to just dump whatever your problem is into it is not really like not really a tangible asset at this point. And all these other like machine learning pieces where you just want to train something and find a generalization about the data. Like there are plenty of models out there that are much smaller and do the same work, that target your problem in a much more efficient way. And I don't know. I feel like Ruby is great at doing those very specific tasks rather than the more generic compute ones. So I'm curious what your experience may be like taking it to the next level, like pushing the boundaries of that compute. Have you noticed like performance wise, like any issues as you're running churning through the data with Ruby versus like a Python library or something like that?
So I haven't noticed too many issues. I know I'm sure like some of the Python libraries are a little bit more performant as people are really heavily working on like speeding them up. And actually, admittedly, there's one method where I'm updating all the rows in my project that if someone runs it, it takes a really long time. But it's not a limitation necessarily of Ruby. It's just of how I did it, and maybe that particular library wasn't as efficient at handling it. I'll probably blame myself. But I don't really see like a bottleneck or anything like that. Yeah, I think.
So I'm curious then, like, how are you? Where are you getting models? I guess number one, and how are you applying them like in the Ruby context?
Yeah, so in terms of where I get models from, so when I initially started building different projects out, it was part of a course called Great Learning, and a lot of the models are contained in like you use the libraries NumPy and Pandas, and those have all the different models that you could want. So you could use a linear regression model, or you could use something else. And when I started doing it in Ruby, I had to poke around and figure out. So for my project, I use there's a gem called Rumali. And it has a bunch of different machine learning models that you can use, and I just used the linear regression one there. But there's other people who have built like models that you can or gems that have like linear regression or k nearest mean or a neural network that you could use, and you just leverage what they have. And that's kind of how you do it. But there's also, and I haven't done this yet. I've been wanting to see. So Hugging Face is a company that now hosts a bunch of different models, and it's really really popular. And I've been thinking about like, well, how do I integrate with that? Like, how do I pull that into a Rails application? Like, these are the things that I want to try to like figure out, because that's the part where if we can kind of crack that code, it really doesn't matter, what model anyone wants to use. They could just go up, pull the model that they want for their use case, and then fine tune it for their use case and problem set. So that's kind of where I'm trying to push it.
Yeah, that's cool. I'd be interested to find out how you integrate Hugging Face. I've been avoiding Elixir's Bumblebee, which they claim now is very easily integratable with Hugging Face, and so I'm hoping that Ruby brings something.
Yeah, that would be great.
Because I mean, Hugging Face is kind of like the de facto source for models now it seems, which is kind of funny. Because didn't they like open source one of the first, or I forget where the first large language open source stuff landed. I feel like it was on Hugging Face.
Maybe. I know one of the big tech companies, didn't they leak their model, and then it was something like that happened, Facebook, and it got exposed, and it's like, oh, here it is. That wasn't supposed to go out.
So, yeah, I'm curious if that was purposeful or not.
So Hugging Face is a hosted AI solution, or
they do provide hosting now where you can spin up compute for specific models and stuff.
Okay, but before you would just bring it into your own app, and then
before it's like the GitHub for data modeling. So that's kind of how they've marketed themselves, and I mean, doing pretty well at it. You can take pretty much any model you can imagine and download it and get it running locally. But it's funny that as Landon mentioned, most of them are Python. So if you want to like integrate most of them, that's all the stuff is what is it, Panda tables that all the data stuff runs on for Python. I don't even know
like pandas and like data tables and all that stuff. Yeah it'd be interesting to see how
what was the equivalent in Ruby that you mentioned then?
So I mentioned like Rumali is one of the libraries that I use to build my project out, but there's other ways to pull in linear regression. I mean, you could write it from scratch. I just didn't want to do that. And honestly, I think the best way for Rubyists to maybe use machine learning now, or I guess Railsists, I guess people are running more Ruby on Rails and just pure Ruby stuff, but people are doing Ruby stuff too, is probably maybe PyCall, because you can call all the Python libraries, and so you have your data science team build the model, and you just call, have your little function, pass in whatever data you want, and out pops the thing you want to display that you're predicting. So I honestly would say that's probably the best bet right now, but I definitely like pushing on the edges of like, what can Ruby do? What's out there right now? And I have to give a shout out to Andrew Kane. His website and the work that he's done is incredible. I think he's come out with like 300 something open source libraries, ranging from Postgres related things to, there might be some PHP stuff, Ruby stuff, but he's built out a lot of useful, helpful libraries, gems that people can use in the Ruby community, and has a lot of really great examples. He even has some blog posts where he does like some image recognition, pulling out like different objects in the pictures, and that a lot of that stuff he's kind of adapted, I think, from other libraries, and has written Ruby wrappers around all these libraries to give Rubyists the tools to kind of do the same things as everyone else. I just would like to see more people using them, and that's kind of the journey I'm kind of going down, is to say the tools are here and they're getting better, and if we don't use them as a community, like we're not going to make progress. So I'm home at night reading a lot of technical stuff and suffering so that we can make progress. No, but it's fun.
So, you did the weather prediction with the linear regression. I mean, I guess I'm kind of wondering what the next step is, right? Or what the next, is there a next project or something else you're going to add to this, or?
Yeah, so I would like to produce more examples, and try to, build some more small examples to show people how they can use these technologies. My end goal is just to get people using it more in Ruby and in the Rails community. I've toyed around with the idea of creating some small courses that are just like, hey, here's how you build your own like neural network in raw Ruby, like nothing else. And if people understand the fundamentals, and this is where I get hung up with, even on LinkedIn, like I get hung up on this, is a lot of people are talking about like these higher level concepts, but nobody really understands underneath, like, what is a neural network? Like I'm saying myself,
right.
Like, how well do I understand these concepts? The lower you go, the deeper you get into them and try to break them down in terms of like how everything is working. If you don't understand the lower level concepts, like all this LLM and all these big term things, it doesn't really mean anything unless you understand how these tools are like working. And we see like people don't understand what they're doing underneath. And I'm not saying everybody does, but I feel like people have to communicate like what these tools are doing. There was a mishap that happened recently at a university where a professor was like putting people's papers for their like final exam or something right before these students were walking across graduation. They're laughing. You've seen it. And he was failing his students because the language model, told him that, they had all plagiarized. It's like, that is a fundamental misunderstanding about what these tools are doing. And we have to educate people on like how they work, like on a lower level, and if we don't, we're going to have problems. Like as much as people want to believe it, ChatGPT is not, it's not turnitin.com, and, even though it can sometimes detect when like stuff it's generated, as it grows and gets more sophisticated and as they train more data, it's not going to always be able to detect even itself. Like we're always generating more than we can, consume. And so it's got to always like kind of keep up. I kind of think about the same thing with like ad blockers. Like ad blockers were blocking code on, ads on pages, and then the pages adapted to like detect if the ad blocker was blocking it and do some judo so it doesn't get detected, and then it would still pop up, and then the ad blockers had to write some more code to block the detection, method. Like, it's just, I feel like it's maybe a bit of the same with AI, like artificial intelligence and LLMs and stuff like that. I also don't know where LLMs are going right now, because there was that article by Noam Chomsky. I don't know if you saw it in the New York Times, where he was talking about some of the limitations of LLM. And then I think I've seen stuff from like Sam from OpenAI, the CEO, and kind of seeing a lot of people talking about LLMs being sort of a dead end and leaning back into like, oh, maybe we need like smaller, like, I think the term that they use are like foundation models that we could like give to people and they can build on top of them. Like, instead of all these super general purpose can do everything models, like, so
Yeah,
it's interesting to see
100%
where
agree
things
with
are
you.
turning. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just getting back to my, initial point of like, the conglomerate of LLMs taking over what was machine learning and now is just like AI, which people are now, okay, well, now it's just an umbrella over machine learning. And lots of people don't even like, saying AI that understand the core concepts, because it is, for one, it's like, it's not really general purpose. There's like very specific purposes, right? Because of how it's built. And like, it doesn't solve everything, right? Like, as an example, like eye tracking, like, you can use Dolly, but like, it's not efficient enough to like track eye movement in time that makes sense, right? Like, you can't do a lot of real-time things that way. I guess Whisper maybe being an exception to that specific rule for audio. But like, I think you're right. I think like smaller models still make a lot of sense. But, at the same time, we'll see. Like, I attended an event from OpenAI that like they had a bunch of people on it that were like kind of evangelizing it and saying how they were working on it. And they seem to think that, the models were so good that it would just like completely obliterate any like traditional machine learning. So like they're kind of like definitively set on, okay, any machine learning team you have is going to have a hard time because large language models are the future of machine learning. And I'm not sold on that yet. I definitely agree with you. And, the more that people play with it, I mean, but we'll see, maybe they get better, but from what's being communicated, it seems like they're hitting their limits, right? And even some of these new open source models where they're, I forget, Dave Kimura, he shared like a distributed project for large language models. And even that is like not very performant. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how that goes. I did want to call, I was looking for this link. There is a SciRuby that has kind of been, I'm curious if you, if you've gotten involved with them yet, if you've worked with any of their projects, because they're for those that don't know, SciRuby is like the tools for scientific computing in Ruby, and there's a lot of great community around that and projects that they're spearheading. I have not like been involved with it or seen it in quite a while, so I'm interested if you found it.
Yeah. So funny enough, I'm on a couple SciRuby chat groups, and I think I might have had some permission on the GitHub repo now. I was using Daru, which is a data frame library for my project, and I believe that gem is hosted on SciRuby's page. And I kind of realized, I was like, well, if Rubyists are going to make any sort of headway in the AI, I'm going to start using machine learning instead of artificial intelligence as much, like, we're going to have to rely on these gems because these are what's out here. Andrew Kane is writing a ton of new stuff, but these are the existing ones, and they serve as a good foundation for doing different projects. And so I reached out actually to that email address on that SciRuby account on GitHub, and I was told like, hey, maybe this email thread thing isn't as active. Like, go to this channel. And so then I found like it was, I think whoever emailed me back sent me to like a Google, like the Google groups channel, and then I was in there poking around, and there seemed to be some activity, but then there was like this IRC/Matrix server that I had to like connect to, and then I got into there, and then I met someone who, like, you know, wants to do more with it, and so like I've been getting more active with the SciRuby community and have been in conversations. But yeah, that I think that's going to be a group that's critical to kind of advancing things a little bit. Funny enough, the meeting was like called together, and I ended up in like, this was like Sunday before RailsConf. I was still in Rochester in this room, and I ended up in a video chat, although it was more audio chat, with a gentleman in Japan. And it was hilarious because it ended up being, oh man, I'm going to forget their name. But he had written a data frame library too, and he was going to speak at Ruby Kaigi. I think it's called like Ruby Ember or something like that. And he was telling me about the work that he was doing and how active, you know, Ruby is in Japan. And I just thought it was super cool to just be in this person's presence. And it just kind of shows that there are people working on different aspects of, you know, the things that are needed to do Ruby, do machine learning in Ruby. So I think SciRuby is going to be really important, whatever ends up becoming of it. In terms of how active it is, I feel like it's a little less active. Some of the libraries you'll notice on there like haven't been updated in years, and they're solid. But I think we need people to, you know, push on it and try to like update some of these libraries or start new projects, and kind of get more active in the community, or else, you know, if we don't build nice things, we won't, you know, have nice things. So
it's funny because you mentioned Japan and like the Ruby Kaigi, and that's where I even I went to Ruby Kaigi in 2015, so that was a long time ago. And it's like completely different in that part of the world for Ruby, right? Because that's their language of choice, which at the time I don't think it was. I think they still prescribed a Python for Japanese like internal projects, but maybe that's changed. But it seemed like that was like the, you know, people had mRuby. mRuby was just announced in 2015 that I knew of, and I had just like you know, realized that Ruby was used outside of Rails like much more frequently for a lot of people, right? And so it's funny because like you open up like the Ruby source code, and it's like a lot of like very academic work, right? Like there's a lot of like here's the, you know, proof for this particular mathematical formula that we've implemented in Ruby from C, and like here it is in C because a lot of Ruby is written in C, right? And so you start like going through, and the more you like pick apart the language, the more it becomes like, well, this is like a very like mathematical like thing. Like, you know, the language is built to solve mathematical problems, you know, initially, like any language. And so it's like, it's kind of funny to see how it's progressed with mRuby, like trying to take on more of these computing challenges, right? And more distributed things. So like, I'm hopeful that that continues and progresses. I know there was an announcement at one of the Ruby comps that this is a problem, right? Data science and Ruby is not a thing. And so I mean, we'll see. I'm hopeful. But what was your take from like the SciRuby community? Like you mentioned that not being like that big, but was it like, is it active? Like, are people, you know, really building on top of the things that they're releasing?
Yeah, and I guess when I'm saying it's not that big, there's a lot of people in the Google groups and some of these channels. I just think it wasn't as like, yeah, probably active, like people pushing to these gems and actively
Yeah.
maintaining them. Yeah. But one thing I've heard from people is just like, and I feel like I'm just here to knock Python. I'm really not. Like, most of the ML models I built have been in Python, and it's easier because right now the documentation, and that was the other thing. I said two things earlier that Python had. One of them actually was like the documentation, like the community aspect too. But like the documentation just isn't really there for Ruby right now, and like some people are coming out with some stuff, but it's hard to build a model when you're trying to figure out like AI and when you're trying to figure out like how to learn about machine learning, and there's no like guide that you can follow. You just have to follow the Python guide and adapt everything to your use case, which is like double the work, but
yeah, it's funny because the embedded systems is the same way, right? Like anytime you want to like hack on some hardware, you can do it in Ruby, and thankfully because of mruby you can do it on a lot more boards, but it's still like not the same as the plug and play Python, where there's so many libraries out there that are just like have already built all the drivers for all the different sensors and things like that. So I'm curious what your take is, like what's missing? Like if you wanted to point more people toward making it happen in Ruby, like what are some of the core pieces that you've seen like need help
that are missing in Ruby? I think honestly, I think a lot of it is getting people to use it. Like, this sounds bad, but I don't think it's really that hard. Like, it's a lot, but it's not that hard. For example, I was talking with my girlfriend yesterday, and I'm reading this long book to see if I want to build a neural network in pure Ruby, and going through some of the concepts of like, oh, here's a perceptron, and here's a bias, and here's a weight, and just drawing it out at this cocktail bar I was hanging out with a couple days ago, and I show my girlfriend a picture of like the perceptron, and it's kind of like, oh, looks like a lot. You drew some math too. You have some, but then I stopped and I was like, so this perceptron, you can think about it as like this neuron, and like in the brain, if there's an input and a neuron like fires, and it fires off a bunch of other neurons. Well, hit these little tails here. These are the inputs that this takes, and it just like the brain, it kind of fires off just like that. And he's like, she gave me a compliment. She's like, you're really good at explaining things and making it simpler. And I was like, I think it's the opposite. I think a lot of this stuff, and I went on I was talking to some people at Blue Ridge Ruby about this too. I feel like a lot of it, sometimes to me, feels like when people explain it, there's all this terminology that I don't understand, and people sometimes make it more complex than it needs to be. But I really think even kids can understand, the fundamental basics of machine learning. It's just all the other stuff that all the buzzwords that kind of get confusing. Like you hear words like TensorFlow, and that sounds super, or whatever, or pandas, or, it sounds really confusing. But I think on the base level, it's like simple, and you sort of build your knowledge incrementally. And like, as we build this, and kind of getting your point, like where do we need effort, and where do we need people to spend time? Like, as we start using the tools more, we'll identify gaps where we can grow. I'll tell you one advantage I see with Ruby is like a lot of like data. So one of the concepts I talk about in my talk that I pulled from the internet and learned about in my coursework is the 80-20 rule. That 80% of the time you're going to spend trying to build your machine learning model is going to be dealing with the data. How are you going to handle nils, missing values? Are you going to take the average? What average are you going to take? Are you going to take a median, or are you going to take a pure average? Are you just going to drop the rows that have the nil? Well, you're losing a bunch of information in the other columns, that you want to build your model. You need all this. And it's like, but Ruby, I think, is pretty good at like you give someone a CSV, you can rip through that CSV and clean up the data really effectively. Like that part of it, I don't think, like, I don't understand like the limits there. You can clean up a lot of data. the model building is 20% of the time you're going to spend, and ensure that there's some libraries that can be cleaned up, and sure, there's some tutorials that could be made and cow paths that could be had, but a lot of that, once people start using these tools, I think a lot of that'll get solved as well. So in short, I think getting people to use the tools, and if there's tutorials out there, and getting people to play with them, like the people in high school who are just now learning, they like Ruby and they want to learn about this subject. If they start using it, they're going to create some really incredible stuff. So
yeah, it's kind of funny. Even in Python, if you want something to be fast, like you go to C or or some other lower level system where you have more access to the resources at disposal. And
we can do that in
you
Ruby
do the
too.
Same thing. I know.
Yeah.
And so it's really like it's funny. Like I personally don't think, let me build a Ruby extension, right? And I was hopeful when I saw the Rust adoption into the Ruby source, right, with all of the new widget and things like that. I'm hopeful that what comes out of that is more of a more efficient process for streamlining that, right? Building an extension is straightforward. The documentation isn't great, but it's straightforward. There's specific things that you follow, like in Rails or something like that, where everything lines up, and you put the pieces here, and then you'll get access to your C extensions. The experience isn't great, right? It's still testing is not, straightforward. There are some missing pieces, and that's kind of where I'm hoping that the gaps get filled, and we'll see that skyrocket, right, where we can get access to these lower level libraries and systems, maybe through us, maybe through something else, where it just becomes easier to build on top of. And I feel like that's maybe one thing Python has, is that platform for growth. And I'd be interested to play with something like that, to get, to try just doing your linear regression in C through an extension, right? And see if it is more performant, right? The baby steps.
Definitely.
So I'm curious, when you're going through your neural network process, and you're learning these things, are you taking these example projects that maybe you're seeing and already thinking about building it in Ruby, or do you want to see it through in Python or whatever tutorials, the language of choice for the tutorial, and then backport? What has been your approach for that?
So my approach has been, I had been building a lot of models and projects in Python, because I did that course with Great Learning, and I thought what I was going to do is what you're saying, is build it in Python and then build it in Ruby. And I did do that kind of with this project. So if you go to the GitHub repo with this project, there was another gentleman who did a similar project that I sort of adapted what he did, not one for one in the code, but sort of the methodology and sort of the project. And I think I picked a different model. So I kind of did do that. I've been hesitant, and in all fairness, I don't know if I'm going to do this neural network project, but I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do it. There's a one side of it where I read a really deep technical book, which is what I'm doing now, to try to understand all the different, everything that goes into the project. I'm trying to stick with that and not adapt to Python intentionally, so I can have a better understanding. Because it's easy to take code that's already written and be like, this if statement gets replaced with this Ruby if statement. This, method gets replaced with this Ruby method, and all the logic that's in that method gets copied over. And then it's I have one for one what the other person has, but the thing I don't have, in theory, I might have a little bit more, but the thing I don't think I'll have is the understanding. And I'm really trying to get a deeper understanding of, if I was thrown into a room and you asked me to write such and such an algorithm or such and such a machine learning model, like a neural net, like could I do that without any outside reference to Python code or anything like that? Could I just understand the formulas and do it? And that's kind of what I'm after personally, because I think if I understand that, when new innovations come out in the machine learning world, like I will understand those much better because I have a foundation. And that's how math works, right? Like if you don't understand elementary algebra, you can't do calculus. You're lost all in calculus. Like there's no hope of doing differentials or anything like that. And then when you take Cal 2, it just gets harder. And it's like, but the fundamentals really help you out when people are doing high level things and you can say like, oh, that kind of relates back to this mathematical principle, kind of like linear regression. If you have any understanding of y equals mx plus b and drawing a best fit line through a bunch of data points, you know, it kind of makes sense how you can use that for multiple variables. And sometimes it gets hard to visualize, like, okay, is it one line or you have multiple variables or multiple inputs, so you have multiple best fit lines? It's multi-linear regression. Like, it gets a little fuzzy, but you have some intuition about, like, what is happening. And I think people need to build that intuition up in general, or we're going to have more mistakes where people just put things into ChatGPT and say, turn it in. Like, you know, like, what are the pitfalls of that? So that's how I'm trying to learn right now. I don't know if I'll stick with it. I may be like, to heck with it. Let me just copy this neural network that's implemented from scratch in Python that someone's done and just one for one Ruby it. I might do that too, and there might be benefit in that. But
yeah, I started doing that with a Raspberry Pi Python library, and then I hit some like language level things that work in Python but not Ruby. I'm like, oh, I guess I'll delete this line.
Which version? Which Python were you using? I know there's like a bunch of different ones.
This was maybe like 3 years ago now. I was playing with it. I think it was before 3. Yeah, it was like 2.7 or something like that.
Okay. Nice.
So maybe it's come. I mean, I know I don't think Ruby has implemented this feature yet. It was like a way that it cleaned up the memory allocations, but it was, I can't even remember now. But it was something like, just, you know, I didn't want to learn about it.
Yeah.
and then I got to the point where I just like left it, and somebody else came in and was like, why don't we just use this thing? I was like, yes, let's use that thing. But, you know, like, to your point though, you learned, you know, all those other things and how it all worked, copying it over. So, I mean, there is value in that. You know, just that. Who is it? You know, didn't Steve Jobs say like great artists steal, right?
Oh yeah,
like good artists borrow, great artists steal, right?
Great artists steal, yeah.
But I mean, there's a lot, like, you know, I'm really good at copying things artwork wise, which I'm not a great artist, but like I could copy something pretty good, and like I learned some techniques doing that, right? Like, like the, you know, some things shaded a specific way, and like I feel like programming is the same way, you know, like, like you've learned something that maybe, you know, Rubyists don't do because we don't need to, but is a helpful technique, right? And so you can apply it in different, you know, different ways. So
in different ways, yeah. You said something very important that I think is important to just, as we expand into this whole ML space, is you said someone helped you or showed you something different later. And I think that's a big part of it too, is like, I have no hope that I'm going to be an expert. I don't even proclaim to be an expert in AI or anything as such. And, but like, I know enough to be dangerous, and I can get so far, and other people will come along and say, oh, I looked at Landon's project, or I looked at someone else's project, and they can build upon it and take it to new levels that, you know, I never even thought of. And I think that's how kind of progress is made, where it's like you throw a stone and then it ripples and people do kind of what they want with the technology, and that's how things grow. And I was going to circle back to another thing. We're talking a lot about large language models, and everybody's like abandoning every other, different way of doing machine learning or non-machine learning AI methods. And I don't think that's necessarily healthy to like go into this homogenous pattern. Like, honestly, I'll be excited when people get bored of LLMs and it's considered, dead, which sounds like blasphemy because really all the other things that we've tried, we've just gotten stuck at those points. Like for a while, we wouldn't even go down this path because we were stuck. Why were we stuck? Well, because we didn't have enough computational power, and NVIDIA hadn't like launched out all these like GPUs, and maybe I don't know if this is true, but like maybe Bitcoin had something to do to accelerate it, right? Because everybody's using all these GPUs and things to mine Bitcoin. And it's like that's, in my opinion, a little bit of waste of time. And so, but now like they've invested all this money, and so now we have all these graphics. Oh, we can do all this cool stuff, and now we're throwing all those resources at training these LLMs, and that's how progress is made. Like we did bad stuff, and then that bad stuff turned out to be good in some other domain, and like look how far we are. But just because we kind of hit a wall in some of the other directions that people have done with like AI and machine learning, it's like it doesn't mean that those walls won't be broken down and people are going a totally like different path. Kind of what we were talking about, where it's like, oh, large language models. Oh, now we're thinking about looking at small models again. Like, but then 2 years after that, they'll be thinking about large models again. Like it's kind of cyclical, and we're always trying to figure. There's more. There's always more. It's very generative, or maybe we can use hybrid techniques, to solve problems. So it's interesting.
Yeah, you're so right about that, and I feel like that's how Rails like really launched Ruby. To be honest, is like Rails like was a very like it solved a very specific set of problems in the web programming world, and it solved them really well, and it was easy to reason about, and the whole magic of Rails, right? And it kind of like made it. Ruby became very popular because of Rails. You can't really deny that. But now that now that Rails is so big, there's so many other like projects that Ruby's like grown to, right? MRuby is a perfect example of that. And so it'll be interesting to see, like, because doing Ruby and embedded programming was like also not a thing, right? So like now it is a thing, and like people have boards that you can get, and it has Ruby embedded on the actual board, and that's how you program, and it's incredible, right? And like so you're so right. Like if we can get like just people using it and the framework starting to build, like I would love to use machine learning in like my apps, right? Like everything's all in one place. Like we don't have to have data teams that have no idea about Ruby, right? Like which is kind of like where teams end up, right? You end up having to hire completely separate, right? Like where do we need to hire completely separate?
Yeah, it's a good point.
So, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. When I was at RailsConf, one of the things that I was kind of curious about was Shopify, and I was curious on how they're doing all their machine learning stuff, and from what I gathered, because I was like running up to the developers there, just like asking, like, are you doing anything with ML and Ruby, and what I gather, I think they're a little bit. I think they have like separate teams. Like I think they have their dev team and their data science team, and I think so. This kind of loops into like why I think it's important that people do ML and Ruby. Is like I just really think it's beneficial because you can have such richer conversation. Maybe if you're speaking the same language, like if your applications in Python and your data scientists are using Python as well now that software engineers can show the data scientists like, hey, how you're processing the data in this way, it's actually inefficient, and like from our computer science background, we can tell you like this is a better way to do it in your Jupyter notebook or whatever. And they're like, oh, that's super helpful. And like, how you're trying to do some statistical related thing in the software application, like you should do it this way from our background in data science, and you can improve. And then there's this cross collaboration that goes on that I think would be like really, really beneficial. But if everybody's sort of like siloed off, it could be hard to like take in the advantages of either side. And maybe the truth is that we just have people become more polyglots. Like maybe Rails develop. I don't know. I'm going to say this. Maybe Rails developers should just learn more Python, and Python developers should learn more Rails, and we should cross contaminate a little bit and kind of improve the whole ecosystem. Maybe there are things that you can do with Rails, or ways that you can reason about things like that we haven't really thought of as being beneficial in Ruby. I keep saying Rails, in Ruby. Like, I was thinking, this is weird, and I don't know if this has anything to do with anything. But one day I'm like, I wonder if meta programming could benefit, like, machine learning in any sort of way. Like, maybe not. Like, maybe I'm just totally off base and I don't know what I'm thinking right now. But maybe there's something special that could be brought over that only Ruby could bring. Or because we were thinking in Ruby, we had that insight. And somehow thinking in Python, it made it a little bit harder. Maybe not, because they're kind of higher level languages, but I don't know yet. Like, we have to keep learning. We have to keep trying things. What did our president say? Like, we do these things not because they're easy. It was like JFK or something, but because it was like the moon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm butchering the quote, but we do these things because they're hard. And through going through the hardness, like, allows us to learn so many things, that we wouldn't have tried otherwise. Like, there's so many times in school where teachers will say, this is the method to get to the answer. Well, there might be a totally different method, but because everybody's using the other method, we never discover there's like a whole set of paths and a whole set of interesting things you can do that we just abandon because it's like, well, Python is the de facto, that's what you're supposed to do. It's like, no, but if we just did what we were supposed to do, we would never have Rails, and we'd all be sitting around, I'm going to say this too, sitting around in a Microsoft shop somewhere writing, ASP.NET. Like, no, like,
Well,
no offense to anyone who writes ASP.NET. I love you all. Keep doing the great work.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that we see with a lot of these kinds of things is that, so let's say that we actually go and we implement a lot of the stuff that Python has pioneered in this area, right? Or, we invent, something that looks a lot like it. And then, we invent some thing that's just, a step or two beyond that, right? And what we'll see is then we'll see a lot of the other ecosystems pick that up, right? And then they'll innovate something and so on and so forth, right? It's funny, I have a really good friend, and he's totally in love with Laravel, right? It's just it's the best thing ever, right? And so he comes to me all the time, and he's like, hey, you should switch to Laravel because it does, I don't know, pick a feature, right? And it's so funny because more than like probably 80% of the time I look at him and go, oh, well, Rails does that too, and for longer, right? Yeah. And so, but it's that thing, right, where it's made these other ecosystems go and implement something that was really good. And who knows? Maybe something in the Ruby AI ecosystem, if we pioneer this forward, could open up some new way of doing some things that are awesome. So,
yeah, I 100% agree with that.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that serverless would solve a lot of this for us, right? the concept where, like, we don't care what the service, like the endpoints are, right? Like, just the service itself does its thing and then gives you back outputs, and you give it inputs, and that's it, right? Like, it would be great if machine learning, just like anything you wanted to compute or did, like, it just, like, you passed it into this thing and it gave you out and you connected to it, right? Like, that would be ideal. But I know that's not, like, easy to do. But it's like our missing piece, right? Like, I was hopeful, like, WebAssembly and things like this, like, they would make this kind of thing happen on an easier, on a bigger scale, right? Where, okay, we don't care what you write things in, and maybe that's not the right way either, right? Like maybe just use what you're good at, and like every language has these things, right? Like these core concepts. It's a programming language. It should do these things because this is what we need computers for, right? Like,
there's like a tension there where it's like picking the right tool for the job, but also not, going in on one technology and kind of making it the tool to do everything.
Yeah, and because when it comes back to it, it's all about like academics, right? Like, where is the money being put to research this stuff, right? Like, if we want to add new models or add new innovations, like, what are researchers and institutions like reaching for to solve these problems, right? And if it's Python, I don't even know that it's Python. There was like R for a while, right? Like, like what comes out of there is basically what gets adopted. And I feel like that is maybe more of what's missing, right? It's like the framework on top of the academics for everything else to trickle out of, right? That's one thing I see missing. But I'm not in the world. Maybe it's already there and I don't know it. If you're out there listening and let me know on Twitter, because I would love to know.
I think there's something to, this is a totally different direction, but like something to like joy as well. Like I found out that, I didn't, I felt I had a lot of insecurity early on in my career about not being a great developer. And, I learned programming a little bit younger and did a bunch of stuff in Java, and it just wasn't really clicking for me. Like I just struggled so much. And even like C++ clicked more for me, or like Ruby clicked more for me. And I often wondered, I wonder if different brains just, and probably this is true, like things just click differently for different people. And had I been forced to be like, you have to write Java and Spring Boot applications for a career, like I would have just lost like the joy and the momentum to develop and try new things. And it was just, for me, even doing this whole talk was because I was like, Ruby's so cool and it optimizes for developer happiness and I love it. And like, because I have all this extra energy at the end of the day, because I actually love it so much and I'm not doing Java, well, now I'm going to try this unique thing that I would have never, ever, ever, ever tried in Java. Like, and someone feels the same about Java and doesn't like Ruby, but like, or vice versa. And it's like, even just the humanness part is something that I feel like people miss. Like me loving what I do and being in a language that I love what I do, like pushes me to push the limits of a technology and find new things and learn about new things. And that contributes to the ecosystem, versus like not enjoying the language I'm using or the technologies that I'm using, like, and maybe that helps unlock, more progress, right?
Yeah.
Developer happiness.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Ruby microscope, which is now out of date, but right, like it was some guy.
That was a book, right?
Yeah, it was a book, but like some guy's just writing down, everything he's finding about how Ruby works, and then it, like, makes this book, and it becomes this like de facto source. Oh, you want to know how like Ruby's internals work? You look at Ruby under the microscope, and it just seems to be like that thing, right? Like you learn it and you write down what you learn from it, and like it could change, like, significantly how it all works. You never know.
Yep.
Who knows? But I agree with you there. Like learning is definitely key. Like the inquisitive mind does like wild things, right?
Curiosity. Yeah.
So what's next? Well, outside of like this neural net ideology, like Blue Ridge Ruby, I would love to know. I know we had like Jeremy on, and what was his name? Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mark.
And
Jeremy Smith.
How did that go?
Mark Locklear. Yeah.
Right, Mark Locklear. I'm curious how that regional conference like felt in comparison to maybe one of the bigger ones. and
Yeah,
maybe some highlights that you liked of it.
I loved it. Like, I've been to 3 conferences in my life, spoken at 2. I went to RubyConf in the last year, RailsConf this year, and this one. And this was, I have to say, this was my favorite. Just having like just a smaller regional conference, it felt feeling a little bit more intimate. Asheville was just a beautiful location and vendor. It was just, I just had a lot of fun, and it was just, I think one of the things that is hard to like explain, like being here versus being there, was just, I felt like Mark and Jeremy really instilled a lot of themselves into the conference. Jeremy began the conference with this meditation. He did a lot of really interesting things, but he was talking about healthy ecosystems and like what makes healthy ecosystems sort of work. And it was just a very mindful sort of meditation. He did another thing later in the conference where he just asked people to express gratitude, and people were expressing gratitude for other people in the community that had helped them, that had given them opportunities, and it's just, I feel like some of that is like lost. It like our day to day of like, we're writing code, we're getting the job done, there's fires, we're putting them out. And it's like, how often do you think about all the people who have helped you be where you are? And that ends up opening up another door of like, if we want to continue to have great, like, kind of moments to get together in technology and have things growing, we need to like build a community that can support that. We need to like mentor others, and help more junior people, and like practicing gratitude. Maybe that has something to do with, creating a healthy ecosystem where we can do our best work as engineers. And for me, Blue Ridge Ruby really captured that community aspect. Like, I really felt refreshed when I got back to my work on Monday. Like, oh, I'm so excited, I'm gonna do a bunch of stuff in the evenings, Ruby related, and just have a good time. It was just a really great experience, and it was also a one-track conference, so it was like you didn't have to pick and choose which talks you saw. It was all, they were all kind of there, and you got to see like everyone if you wanted to. So yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, I attended Philly RB for a while, and
okay.
It was, yeah, I really enjoyed. I know it's even smaller. It's not really a conference, but the format.
I was there 2 nights ago, like literally.
Oh, really?
Either last night or the night before. Yeah,
that's funny. Yeah, I didn't attend many, maybe like 5 or 6 of the meetups, but I always, it's always great. And you get that smaller community, and it is like easier to connect with people.
Yep.
And it still has that conference feel with people giving talks, and you get to follow up with them, right? Well, which as a speaker maybe isn't that great. But
yeah, well, and back in the day, I mean, all the regional conferences like Mountain West Ruby Conference here in Salt Lake, right? It was just, it was small enough to where you really could, find the people you wanted to interact with. And, you had a lot of people from across the community showing up. I feel like RailsConf and RubyConf, you have so many people there that it's easy to get lost in the shuffle. I mean, the flip side is that it's a large enough conference to where it provides you a wide breadth of whatever you want to learn. So, I can't say that it's a poorer option. It's just a different option. And it's nice to have that different option where you can go and be part of a smaller group. And then, yeah, the users groups are even more that way, right? Because you show up, you have 30, 40, 50 people there. Maybe the bigger ones I've seen are 100, maybe a little bit larger than that. And so, yeah, you get to know people. You get to kind of build that community that way. It's awesome.
Have you heard of conference, or what is it? Hallway track?
Yes.
Oh, the hallway track.
Yeah. Yeah, the hallway track is awesome.
It is awesome. Someone introduced me to my first conference. I was like, you can do this? You cannot go to a conference talk because you feel cognitively just overloaded because it's your first time being at a conference and you don't understand the minutia of David Patterson's really awesome talk. You can just hang out in the hall, talk with people. It's so cool.
I don't know if
you
they
can
still
watch
do it.
the talks later.
They used to do the unconference, which was like an extension of the hallway track, where they had like a special room that was devoted to like people that wanted to come in off of the hallway for like a non-conference conference, and they would have talks. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I've seen those. Usually, what they are, they're kind of the impromptu talks, right? So people just sign up for a room, or they'll submit the talks for the unconference, and then people vote on them, and then they just get slotted in.
Mm-hmm.
It's just funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me. There were some lightning talks. Oh, sorry. I'll go ahead.
No, it's good.
That time.
Yeah, we're getting close to time, but go ahead and say what you were going to say about lightning talks.
No, I was just going to say there were lightning talks at Blue Ridge Ruby, and one of my favorite lightning talks. I forget who it's by. Oh, I'll have to send you a link. Yeah, it's blinking, but he was using a lot of like not real terminology for different things. So he's talking about like lambda, and he's like, this is often known as the alligator eating the hot dog method or expression or whatever. And we were all laughing, and it's just like, and then he was talking about procs. Procs don't get hot dogs, so they're unhappy, and so they throw this error or whatever. It was great. Like it's just fun to have those things that come.
Procs, not Crocs.
Yeah, procs, not Crocs. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Well, thanks for having me here. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to go ahead and do picks. I tried doing a self-promo thing, and it didn't really go. So if you have something you want to self-promo, be shameless. Just throw it in your picks. Valentino, why don't you start us off with picks?
Oh, man, I'm not quite ready. I guess I've been doing more lasering. I have this 20-watt laser, maybe 25-watt laser behind me, and it's so fun. It's just like a wavelength thing, so you can put your hand under it and it's not going to burn you or anything. But it lets you etch on all kinds of different metals and plastics and woods, and I'm just having a blast with it. It's by a company called ComMaker, and super easy to use. I do have to dual boot into Windows to use their software, which is unfortunate. But it works. I could just take a vector image even and plop it on, and it lasers an image, and it's been a lot of fun.
That does sound fun. I'm going to throw out a couple of picks. The first one, I usually do a board game pick. I'm going to go with a game that I've picked before. It's Legendary, Marvel Legendary. We have a whole bunch of the expansions for it as well. So we have like the Hulk expansion, the Thor expansion, and the Guardians of the Galaxy expansion. And anyway, that's a ton of fun. I think Board Game Geek has a weight on it of like 2.39, so it's pretty simple to pick up if you're a casual gamer, but it has enough of the interesting deck building elements to be a fun game if you want to really get into it. So I'm going to pick that. Let's see, our book club, we're currently doing 7 languages in 7 weeks, and that's been awesome. If you want to join us, we do it every Tuesday morning at 9:00. And it's currently $17 a month. And we jump in, we read the book and all that good stuff. So we're getting ready to pick our next book. So just be aware that's going to be a thing. And then another thing that I've been playing with, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to land on this. So I've been using a CRM system to like invite guests and stuff like that. The problem I've always had is that none of these do exactly what I want. But I recently saw a demo of Zoho. They have a CRM. They have all kinds of stuff that you can run through their system. And anyway, so I've been looking at Zoho for some of the stuff that I want to do, and it looks like it's. So the reason I picked the solution I have now is because it does a whole. It eliminated a whole bunch of different apps that I was subscribed to, and they all run in the same system, and so they're all mostly integrated. but some of the limitations are kind of not great. And Zoho's a little bit more fully fleshed out. And so I've been playing with it to see if it's something that I may want to look at and switch to. So I'm going to pick them just because it's cool stuff. They also have a wider range of API options and a wider range of things that you can integrate with Zapier. And so anyway, those are all things that I'm looking at right now. So I'm going to pick Zoho. And then, yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all of my picks. Landon, you have some things you want to shout out about?
Just, is it anything or everything?
Anything. Yeah, anything. We have people pick books, TV shows, movies.
We can't have shameless self-promotion.
Yep. Absolutely.
Well, I guess my pick would be NEAT, NEAT. Not everything's about technology. It's a testable newsletter. It's going to be great.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I think that'll be my pick for the day. Yeah.
Good deal. Is there a good place to get that? Is there a website or something?
Yeah, it'll be testdouble.com/NEAT. NEAT. So.
Awesome. We'll put a link to that in the show notes too. So
I have a Twitter scanner that looks for anytime Justin Searles tweets with NEAT in it. And it's a search filter, and I use it as like this program is not behaving as it should. Like it's pretty great.
Awesome. All right, one last question. If people want to follow you online, Twitter, GitHub, Facebook, LinkedIn, where do they find you, Landon?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. You could search for Landon Gray. Other than that, I'd say Twitter. My online name is The Day Isn't Gray. And I'll be probably around Twitter until it dies.
All right.
Or it gets
thanks
better.
for coming. This was fun.
Thanks.
All right. We'll wrap up. Until next time, folks, max out.